Join me in my continued search to find the greatest film of all time. It's time for 1978. Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1978, or at least the ones that I've seen anyway. Now, when I sat down to plan this video, I realised that I'd seen 12 films from this particular year, so not much homework for me to do this time around. I did watch one additional movie to take that total up to 13. It was a film that I absolutely wanted to make sure that I watched in time for this ranking. So we've got a record amount of films today, 13. We've not had that many in any of the lists so far. I think once we get into the 80s, the record will just keep going up and up for a while, because I reckon I've definitely seen more films in the 1980s than the 1970s. But for now, let's concentrate on 1978. We've got 13 films to get through. A quick reminder that the top film today will go through to the grand final of 100 films further down the line, and the film which comes second may also get into that final, numbers permitting. So let's get into it then and find out what is my 13th favourite film that was released in 1978. This is a cannibal film which is set somewhere in Papua New Guinea. Well, it's that part of the world anyway. And I guess you could call this film a kind of precursor to Cannibal Holocaust, which came out a couple of years after this. But this is nowhere near as disgusting and as vile as some of the scenes in Cannibal Holocaust. There's only really one nasty scene in Mountain of the Cannibal God. Apart from that, it's not a bad horror film. This is not a bad film considering the fact that it's come last on today's list. It just doesn't have any value to me anymore. I saw it a couple of times in the noughties. I had a DVD of it briefly and then I gave it away. I can't see myself ever going back to it. Cannibals is not really one of my go-to subgenres in horror at all. This film does have Ursula Andress in it though, who was Honey Rider in Dr. No, the first James Bond film. I think this is the only other time I've seen Ursula Andress in anything apart from Bond. And she looks quite good in this film, from what I can remember. I mean, there's 16 years between Dr. No and Mountain of the Cannibal God, and yet she's kept herself in shape. I mean, her career had probably gone down the tubes a little bit by the late 70s, which is why she's appearing in this film. But if you're into cannibal films, by all means, give this a shot. It's not bad, and I promise you, it's not quite as disgusting as some of those really extreme ones like Holocaust and Cannibal Ferox. This was re-released in 1978. Obviously, it came out much earlier. I've allowed quite a few Disney animation films to creep into the competition through the back door as we've been going along. It's not like most of them are going to trouble the higher ends of any of these lists. Pinocchio was a film which creeped me out a little bit when I was a kid. All that stuff about kids turning into donkeys and being sent away to some kind of island. I've not re-watched it at any point since I've had kids. I mean, I've got 3 young kids of 9, 8 and 5, and I don't remember ever having Pinocchio on the TV since I've become a dad. I would be sort of curious to rewatch this film at least once more at some point during my life in some kind of circumstances, either with my kids or future grandkids or just on my own. I don't know. Whether I will ever get around to that, maybe not, I don't know. But this was not a bad film from my childhood anyway. Here's another one which was re-released in 78 but originally came out much earlier. Now, if you pushed me, I would probably say that Pinocchio is a better movie than The Jungle Book, but The Jungle Book is more special to me. And the reason why is because this was the first ever film I saw in the cinema. So I'm guessing that it must have been re-released again, like 83, 84. Probably saw it on some kind of Saturday morning matinee or something. I don't remember that particular trip to the cinema that well now, just the fact that that was my first trip. And after watching that, I think my next few trips to the cinema were for things like Back to the Future 1 and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So I only really saw one kiddie film at the cinema when I was young, and then I jumped into more adult films straight after, whereas my kids have been to like loads of kiddie films, so quite a contrast there. But The Jungle Book is not a bad movie for what it is. It's not really my genre, obviously, but I'm familiar with the characters and the songs, though I couldn't really give you a detailed synopsis of the plot anymore. I don't really care. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again, to be honest. So here we have another example of an Oscar-winning movie not doing very well in one of my lists. This was the new film I watched specifically for this ranking. I had seen maybe an hour and a half of it about 20 years ago and then turned it off for some reason. It is a very long film. This time around, I stuck with it to the end, but I just found it very, very tedious for long stretches. It's a film about these guys who go off to Vietnam, and it's about the effects that it has on them and their families, and then they come home and things aren't quite the same for them. I get that as a story, it has value in terms of telling us, what life was like for families in that era. So it's got some historical worth. But as a movie, I didn't find it entertaining at all. It takes an hour and 6 minutes to get to Vietnam. I'm not usually the sort of guy who says that movies should be cut down in length. I kind of find it tedious when people say that a lot, but I'm going to make an exception on this occasion. This film is 3 hours. It could easily have been two. I mean, there are long stretches of time where we just see characters getting drunk and messing around. That's fine, but it goes on forever. It's so long. So no, it's not really a film for me. I'm sort of glad that I saw it once, but I certainly won't watch it again. It's just not a great film in my opinion. Jaws 2 is a sequel I watched quite a lot when I was a kid, and I've seen it at least two or three more times since then. I've seen this film way too often, to be honest, given the fact that I don't actually have that much respect for it. If we're going to be completely honest, when it comes to Jaws 2, it is a cash grab. I mean, this is a film which has nothing to add to the original story. It's just a studio double dipping, trying to make some more money. They throw Roy Schneider back in there. Amity Island is back. There's another shark that randomly turns up, and apart from that, I mean, what is there that we've not already seen in the first film? They even do that same spiel about the mayor who doesn't want to close the beaches. It's a lazy, lazy sequel. It does have entertaining things in it, a few cool kills. The last 20, 30 minutes is watchable when all those teenagers are trying to survive on those capsized yachts and things. I mean, the shame of it is I'll probably end up watching this film again in the future because I always seem to move on to this one after I've watched the original film, but I'm not a Jaws 2 fan. It came out in an era where it was acceptable to put this type of effort in when it came down to a sequel. I think these days there would be more negative reviews for a film like Jaws 2. This is a film which probably has a completely crap reputation. It's probably one of those movies which has like 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a kind of disaster film about an outbreak of bees just swarming everywhere and killing loads of people, and the army have to get involved, and scientists are sort of brought out the woodwork to try and find solutions to the problem. Michael Caine is one of those scientists. A friend introduced me to this film at uni about 20 years ago. I only watched it the one time, but I had a lot of fun watching it. I've never gone back to it. I would like to watch it again. There's one great line which I've never forgotten in 20 years. Michael Caine is about to get on a helicopter, and this woman stops him and says, "What if the bees pick up on our new frequency?" or something like that. And Michael Caine just turns around to her, totally deadpan, and says, "No, because it's on a completely different sonic level." And then he just turns around and gets on the helicopter. And me and my friend were just in absolute stitches the way he delivers this line, and then just turns around as if that's the end of the conversation. Absolutely brilliant. So I like The Swarm. It's cheesy, B movie fun. Most people will probably consider it shit, though. I'm not really into musicals, but there are a handful of such films I will make an exception for. Grease is one of them. I've seen it many times. It is a cool film. It's got lots of cool characters like Danny and Sandy. I used to have a crush on one of the girls who's in the Pink Ladies. I can't remember her name. It's the one who thinks she's pregnant and then she finds out that she's not right at the end. She was more my sort of girl than Sandy. There have been many times throughout my life where I've been on a night out and I found myself drunkenly dancing to some random Grease song, maybe a Grease megamix or something like that, very, very late at night. I think we've all sort of been there at some time or another. Funny story, my dad was a big fan of Grease 1 and 2. I've never seen number 2. You are not going to see that on a future ranking. But what he used to do is he used to collect films that he'd tape off the TV, and he would get a piece of paper and sellotape it to the side of the VHS tape and write the name of the film on. Probably lots of people used to do this when they were collecting movies like in the 80s, 90s. But he wasn't very good at spelling. So he spelt Grease 1 right, but when he got a tape for Grease 2, he spelt it like the country. So throughout my entire teenage years, on our film shelf was Grease 1 and Grease 2 side by side, but spelt differently. And Grease 2 was spelt like the country. Really, really weird. Damien 2 suffers the same fate almost as Jaws 2 in that it's a film which doesn't really do a lot different from the first film, and that's its big failing. The key difference this time is that Damien is a lot older, but that doesn't really make any difference to the proceedings. I mean, I still have a good time with this film. It's got some good kills. The one I always remember is the one with the train. That feels like something which could actually happen in real life if somebody wasn't really paying attention to their surroundings and maybe they had their earphones in or something. And I like how this film starts. There's a really chilling scene somewhere abroad where two priests, I think it is, get trapped in a cave in. That's a great way to kick the movie off. On the whole, though, this is definitely at least one step down from the original film. I still haven't seen the third one. I'm going to have to get on to that before we get to whichever year the rankings will be for that. So Owen II's not bad. I've seen worse sequels, I guess. This is one I discovered quite recently, actually. I did a full review for it about a month ago, 2 months ago, so check that out if you want to. It's a decent horror film with a sprinkling of black humour in there. Probably not enough to call it a full-blown horror comedy, but it's there. I love the two leads in this. They've got a great chemistry. And I like the fact that the piranhas are caused by military experimentation gone wrong in this film, rather than just some diver going too deep one day and finding some old ancient eggs in a cave or something like that. The military angle just provides an interesting dimension to the movie on top of the fact that these murderous piranha are going around killing loads of people. But this is definitely an underrated horror film from the late 70s as far as I'm concerned. But like I said, I've already done a review, so I'm not going to go into it too much here. I'm not sure if you'd call this a war film. It's sort of about a big group of mercenaries who they're brought together and sent on some kind of mission to rescue somebody in some kind of war-torn African country. I'm not sure if it's a fictional country or one that's actually real. I can't remember now. I saw this film a few times when I was growing up because it was one of the films we had taped and it was just on our shelf, always there, available. And I've seen it at least one more time in my 20s. This is probably the longest I've ever gone without watching it, actually. And just talking about it now is making me really want to go and revisit it. It's a really fun action adventure. It's quite violent from what I can remember. There's a really good ambush scene on a bridge where I think a lot of the mercenaries get killed. There's a lot of mercenaries who go on this mission from what I can remember. It's not like the Dirty Dozen or something. There's literally loads of them. It's a big band who go on this thing and a lot of them do die. The scene that I remember the most is when this one guy is stood outside this cave and all these tribesmen are charging at him and he's just mowing them down. And then he runs out of bullets, and so he pulls his like a machete out or something, and he kills another one who comes out, and eventually he gets overrun, I think. And I always remember feeling sorry for that guy, but I suppose he should have just run off rather than just stand on the same spot. But my memory could be a little hazy because it's been a while since the last time I saw the wild geese. This is definitely, in my opinion, the best Roger Moore film outside of Bond. It's the only Roger Moore film outside of Bond that I hold any value to, I think. So I don't think The Wild Geese is a very famous film, but it's one that I've always had a lot of respect for and I've always enjoyed. When I was a kid, Christopher Reeve's Superman films were the only decent superhero films out there. I mean, I had a Spider-Man quilt on my bed at one point when I was a wee nipper, but there weren't any decent Spider-Man films out until the Tobey Maguire ones, really. So Superman was the thing if you were into superhero stuff. And I used to like all the Superman films. They were regularly on the TV. I did used to prefer 2, 3, and 4 when I was a kid to number 1 because 2, 3, and 4 have got really cool villains, whereas from a kid's perspective, the only villain in Superman 1 is the character who's played by Gene Hackman. He's just a normal human guy, sort of being mischievous. Now, my opinions have changed as an adult. I now have much more respect for the original movie. I mean, there was a time when I would have preferred the viewing experience of Superman 4: A Quest for Peace over the original film because it had Nuclear Man, but I would not feel that way now. I actually bought a Blu-ray for Superman just a year ago. I've got it out just for the clip. And it actually comes with an extended cut that's like 3 hours and 8 minutes. So I put that on and watched it, and there's some interesting additional stuff in there. There's a lot of filler as well. I think it was put together for television rather than because there was actually a need for an extended version of this film. So going forward, I'm not entirely sure which version I'm going to watch the next time I watch the movie, but the movie, in any form you watch it, is one that I've got a lot of respect for. It's a really, really great film, a classic movie. So now we're into the top two and the films which will be going through to the grand final. And first up, in the runners-up position, we have Dawn of the Dead, the original version. I first saw this when it came onto British TV around about 1996, 1997. I think it was on a Sunday night. I stayed up to watch it very, very late, even though I had school the next day. I was already like 16, possibly, by this point. So I'd reached the point where I was taking personal responsibility for myself, if you see what I mean. This film completely blew me away, though. I just thought it was amazing. I couldn't get it out of my head like the next day, the next 2 days. And I've been a massive fan of it ever since. I bought a DVD for it like years ago, and I've had it on my shelf a long, long time, watched it many times. In my opinion, this is the best of the 6 Romero zombie films. I don't understand it when some people say they prefer Day of the Dead or even the Dawn of the Dead remake. Some people prefer Night of the Living Dead as well. I mean, for me, this is really the obviously best of the Dead movie. But I don't know, we're all different. But I love the shopping mall setting in this. The apartment block stuff at the start is great as well. There's so much stuff in this film, so much splatter, so much action, so many great kills of zombies and humans that it just makes it such a rewatchable movie. I mean, I don't know how many times I've watched this film, but it's got to be a lot. I even wrote a song about this movie not long after I watched it for the first time. I went through a phase when I was a teenager, just writing songs now and again, and I didn't write many, like 5 or 6 in a very short time span. But I actually wrote a song about Dawn of the Dead, which is just crazy when I look back on it now, because it's not something I've done since I was like 16, 17, but I absolutely love this film. You're probably wondering right now what is in the number 1 spot. Well, let's find out. Yep, sorry to be predictable, but Halloween is my favourite film from this year. When I did my favourite horror films ranking just before Christmas, Halloween was the winner. Officially, right now, it is my favourite horror film of all time. But will it end up being crowned my favourite film of all time from all genres? Because this is a whole different ballgame going up against all the classic films from all of cinema. It's a bit like a sports team winning in the regional leagues and now it's got to go to the nationals. Can it have that same level of success? It's going to be fascinating. I honestly don't know at this stage how Halloween is going to do against 99 other amazing films in the eventual grand final. But right now, officially, it's at least my favourite horror film of all time. We'll see if it becomes my favourite film ever. There was a time, though, when Dawn of the Dead was my favourite horror film, and at some point, Halloween's just kind of taking it over. There's not much between these two. They are both absolutely legendary films, in my opinion. I can tell you the exact date, by the way, that I first watched Halloween. It was October the 31st, 1993. Yeah, it was actually a Halloween because in the UK, in the 90s, they used to show certain films on... They used to try and match films to the dates where the actual films are happening. So, for example, we'd get a Friday the 13th film sometimes on a Friday the 13th. We'd get Christmassy films at Christmas, etc., etc. And they used to show Halloween sometimes on Halloween. So I can easily remember that I saw this film for the first time, October the 31st, 1993. So we're coming up to 30 years. I've been a massive fan of this movie. It is one of the great films from my life. I absolutely love it. And not a surprise that it's come number 1 today, but the acid test is going to be that grand final. So we'll see down the line how how that goes. Right, we've come to the end of our rankings for today, but I've still got one more question left to ask. I'm going to name 4 today. The first 2 are horror films, The Toolbox Murders and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Then we've got a film called Eyes of Laura Mars, which is a sort of thriller, I think. But it was written by John Carpenter. That's the reason why it sort of caught my interest. He didn't direct it, just wrote it apparently. So I'd be sort of curious to see that film, and I'm not in a massive hurry, has to be said. Same with the 2 horror films I just mentioned. And the 4th film I'm going to include in this section today is Death on the Nile, which is a sort of follow-up to Murder on the Orient Express. I would have watched this if it was available to rent on my various streaming platforms. It isn't. I'd have to go and buy a DVD, I think. And I think the fact that I've still not seen Murder on the Orient Express stopped me from going ahead and doing that. But at some point, I'd like to watch both of those movies. They look really good, and they've been remade now. So I've got loads of films in that kind of series that I'm interested in, and I'm going to get around to. But anyway, that's it for today. I'll be back soon with a ranking for 1979. We've got just one more year left in the 1970s. For now, bye-bye.